everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Contact Lost, the Polish podcast about Warhammer 40k, the competitive scene, everything competitive-wise, both in Poland and abroad. I'm your host, Tweak, and with me I have my trusty co-host, Joker.
Hey guys.
Hi, dude. And today we talk about very interesting topic, a huge international event that is drawing near, with big steps. And to talk about that event, to talk about the Polish preparations and talk about all the lists that the majority of people haven't seen yet, we give you Typhus.
Hello.
Hi, man. Thanks for agreeing to join us. Thanks for bringing all the knowledge with you. We'll see in a moment how it goes. Before we get to that, we wanted to apologize to all our listeners who have been impatiently waiting for another episode. Unfortunately, life has caught up with us, and I have been busy with work. Joker, I think, is changing work. And Typhus has been traveling, and he's been to the States, I think. So, yeah, please accept our sincere
I do not
apology.
recommend traveling to states.
You don't? Why not?
Well, it's basically third world country in a Gucci belt. That's all I'm gonna say.
Wow. Wow. I'm happy to hear what our American listeners have to say. Leave a comment if you agree or disagree with Typhus, but please don't dislike.
I'm all about the shade. You already know that.
Yeah, we know. So, to counter that, I can say that on, I think, 14th of August, I will be traveling, for business purposes to St. Louis anyway, myself. So I'll check. I'll see. I'll let you know how it goes. By the way, if there is anyone in St. Louis area who, knows of any events or gaming venues or anything and would like to welcome me there, I will be more than happy to participate and come to anything that happens, or just visit your FLGS or whatever you have. So let me know in the comments if there is anything I should pay attention to, and I'll be happy to join you while I'm there. Anyway, that's enough of private topics. Let's get to the meat of the episode. So, Typhus, the team has been preparing for, well, I think 2 years, maybe, I don't know, since the last WTC, probably. The entire country, the entire Polish competitive scene chips in and tries to help the Polish national team in their preparations. All tournaments happen in, the WTC format and so on. Everything is organized like that. Do you feel well prepared for the event?
Well, obviously, as you can tell, you never feel well prepared to the event. No matter how, like, the more you actually prepare, the more you realize where you actually are lacking any information. So in that sense, I do not feel well prepared because I'm aware of all the lacking parts. But when it comes to how much we know, I think it's the tournament that we are the most prepared for, or like the WTC/ETC that we are the most prepared for, since I've been to those, and my first one, which I wasn't playing in the team back then, was 2012. So it's been a while, but the conception of the TTS and how much players actually can share their knowledge and playtest stuff through that medium actually allowed us to discover so much more and make sure that everyone is aware of how certain armies work, which it was way more difficult previously, because even if you gather a whole team for one weekend of play, you couldn't watch all the games. But when it comes to TTS, 2 players play, remaining 6 players can watch the game and not only give their input, talk about tricks, what could have been done different. They can also get intel for themselves to realize how a specific army works. So I think there's been way more preparation, and I would say there's hunger even in the players and in our community after those 2 years that we basically missed the event. So overall, I'm feeling good, but not too cocky. Like, I think we prepared well, but there's still we need to do in the incoming 3 weeks.
Okay, but access to TTS is something that I think all the teams can boast, or well, all the teams have. You go to tournaments as well. has the Polish national team done anything that stands out that makes the preparation even better?
Oh boy, it depends what you mean by stands out. Well, I think the biggest change was that we have many new players this year, and that couldn't have been done without playing those 20 plus 8v8 games that we played in the past 2 years, because we had a chance to actually teach the new players how the game works on a completely different level than they were used to when they were playing locally. And thanks to that, we saw some of the players that were kind of unknown to the community rise to a really good level, like Myson. You guys surely know he literally won every tournament he attended this year and previous year. So
yeah, and to
that's
our
quite
listeners, he's not your son; it's just his name.
his nickname. His nickname. I hope I do not have children. God's fingers crossed. So there's been a lot of opportunities for development. So I would see those games being a great feature, but I did not see anything like especially outstanding. It's just playing a lot of games, getting as much intel as possible, and also sharing all the knowledge from all the top players. So we weren't preparing only as the main team. And by main team, I mean the 8 players who are playing in the team. We also had like 5, 6 people who aren't in the team chipping in, giving their information, spying for the data. So there was a lot going on. I won't lie, when I was in States, like one day I was out for 8 hours from the morning till the evening when I got back to Wi-Fi, and only in a Tyranids channel, when we are figuring out what we want to bring in needs list, there was over 600 messages in 8 hours for one army, and we were going through like 14 armies. So there's been a lot to keep track of.
And speaking of, what do you think about the sudden, let's say, release of simultaneously the new mission pack, then also the balanced data slate, the points update? So was that a big challenge, or did it not, change that much in terms of what you were thinking about bringing?
I would say it impacted a bit, but thankfully what armies we were already thinking about in the previous team comp before all the changes was pretty much the same what we brought. So nearly all the information we've got previously translated to what was given to us with the Nephilim and whatever was the other balanced data slate. So I think a lot of our knowledge translated, and historically, Poland got their best scores when there was actually a change of edition, because we have very tight community that brainstorms a lot of ideas. So when the how do you call it? When the vote whether to include Nephilim and balanced data slate for this event finished with the result of allowing all of it, I was kind of happy. I knew there's a lot of work in front of us and that a lot of changes might happen, but I knew that this is something we thrive in, that we actually like all the changes because we are on our toes all the time and we are quick to adapt. So yeah, I would say I'm quite happy, especially maybe not really happy about certain things about the game. It's a completely different topic, but I think they make the game easier and easier with dumber and dumber secondaries and ways of balancing the game by making it even less interactive, which I hate. I will use that word. I openly hate making the game even easier because it's already very easy and very, you can calculate a lot. But other than that, I'm quite happy we got those changes, because the meta previously Oh boy, it was horrible again. And now it's kind of wide open.
So, to slowly segue into what we want to talk about, I wanted to ask about the impact of Nephilim onto, well, the meta as a whole. Because when I heard that it was coming out that we would be playing with maximum of 6 CPs, for starters, and then probably you would lose every single one for a relic, world of trade, and so on and so on. My initial thought was, oh boy, we're going to see identical lists everywhere, because we are limited to only take the best. We cannot even experiment with anything because nobody would want to waste CPEs on stuff. Is that when you get a look at the lists that different countries had sent in for the WTC, is that correct? Are the lists very similar, or is there a wide variety of different lists within factions?
Oh, obviously there are armies that have more variety and those that have less, but even those that have more variety are still kind of limited to top choices in the codex. So I would overall say that this ETC has maybe the most boring faction spread ever, because as I said previously, the game can be calculated on many levels. So there's no room to actually think about niche armies that can fill a specific pairing niche or counter something specific in the team. Maybe in like top dog field, like you can tailor needs to play into something. You can tailor Eldari to play into something, etc. But you cannot find a outlier army that would actually fill in that gap. So I would say it was a bad impact. And some of those armies that actually have some differences in it, like namely Necrons, have completely. They are pretty similar. All of them, nearly all of them, have Silent King, but then the choices are different. Some people bring more combat, some people bring Raves, some people bring more shooty destroyers. A lot of people bring Tans. So there's different approaches, but like the core is the same. And I think it's only a matter of time till like a set solution is found, which I'm afraid might be quite close. So, and there are armies like Sisters, which literally vary by 200 points per list. It's only if you take third Retributor squad, or you take one Retributor squad and Castigator and something else. So there's not much difference. So I'm kind of disappointed, and I feel what you said, that it might be that the game will become even more flat. And in team setting, it's not as visible because you still tailor those top armies. Like you can tailor Necrons, you can tailor Eldari, you can tailor even Blood Angels, you can tailor them. But if you are not a top army, I don't think there's a room to actually experiment that much now, which is sad. And I don't like it.
Okay, so just one more question before we get into the numbers. Somewhere when you were talking, you mentioned, I think I heard the word spying. Is that actually something that you've been doing, and how efficient is the Polish national team at spying on other teams?
We might have accounts somewhere people don't know about.
Ooh.
I don't
PCP.
think we want to share that publicly, do we?
No. I might be on some hidden Discords, or I might not be.
So you would, on a scale from 1 to 10, you're pretty efficient at spying, I guess.
Yes, I just glue a mustache on myself and bring a big nose with glasses, and no one notices. I'm that good.
All right, that's
no,
good
but jokes aside, I don't think there's much to spy on after a change that is like 3 weeks before the list, even before the list deadline, because you cannot even comprehend all the things that are happening in other teams. You need to focus on what you actually know and what is your perception. You might get some intel what other teams are thinking about, but you cannot still really process it and even playtest it. So it was more like a source of echo chamber that if we found a certain solution, and I saw in certain groups, forums, discords, that some teams also do that, I knew that I was probably doing something right. That if other teams come to the same conclusion, there is probably some grain of truth in that.
Okay, so having said all that, let's go into the meat of things. So starting with, what is our team bringing? What factions made the cut?
So, as I said, the game is more calculated right now, so I don't think there's many surprises when it comes to factions. We bring the most popular ones, which is obviously Sisters, which I also think Art of War seriously overestimated their strength. But I mean, their tier lists always were shit, shots fired. So maybe they will learn a thing or two on this event. Other than that, we have Sisters, we have Chaos Knights, we have Imperial Knights, we have Hallis instead of Hail of Doom list, which many teams actually opted for. We also have Drukhari, which is funnily enough one of the lesser seen armies at the event, which I can get why, which is still mind-boggling to me that Death Guard and Thousand Sons are more popular. We also have Tyranids, Tau, and as always, the 8th army escapes me.
Did you mention both flavors of knights?
Yeah, I actually did.
And
It's always like that. You just mention 7 armies and then you always forget about the
we have Thousand Sons. Oh, Necrons. Yeah.
No, Thousand Sons are shit.
Really?
Yeah, like to give you actually a reason why. They really like domination as a secondary, and they do not really have that good secondaries nowadays. And they weren't that good previously anyway, and armies that were good into them got more popular. So it's a kind of a snowball effect.
To the last also disappeared, which was an option. So losing 2 viable secondaries and getting none in return really.
I think it's the same reason why Rack City isn't present in any team. A lot of armies depended on those 2 secondaries, and yeah.
Okay, so before we go any deeper into this, I think our listeners might enjoy knowing what the, I don't want to say army percentages because I'm not really good at percentages, but how many representatives of every faction are there at the WTC? Because I find it interesting. So I'll go from
actually, sorry to stop you there, but I had 2 short questions that are more in line with what we were just talking about.
Oh, so, yeah, absolutely. Go on.
Armies. So, Typhus, are there any armies that you seriously considered that you're not taking?
Yeah. I mean, seriously, not seriously. One thing you need to account for is when you actually have those 3 ways of choosing an army, there's an issue that you have limited resources with the players. Like you cannot playtest anything, and I think it's better to actually take an army that you are quite confident how it will fare, and you have an idea how it will work in the pairings, rather than going for something that's very popular online. So my choice of 8 armies was backed by doing over 30 test pairings, where I realized where were the flaws in our setup, what we needed to counter, what armies probably would play more into which pairings according to the pairings I've done. So there was a lot of basically informed decisions. But when it comes to armies that we thought about, it was Blood Angels, obviously. which I will not disclose why we didn't choose them, but we had a reason due to pairings, which is also present in our team. Other than Blood Angels, I was actually looking at Death Guard, which is quite popular at the event. I just realized we didn't have time to even deep dive into it, so we just submitted it. And then there were two other armies that I looked into, which were AdMech and Customs. Because I still think those two have some play, but they would require way more from the players themselves, and they have weak secondary game, which is painful.
So Marines were generally a joke for a very long time around our community, and then Death Guard wasn't really seriously considered before. So what changed for those two armies that you almost took them?
Secondaries mainly. I mean, they have pretty non-interactive secondaries that give a lot of points. So it was a decision what safe army should we choose. But Blood Angels also have a great kick in close combat, and you need to mention that both Death Guard and Blood Angels got point reductions that were quite massive. So it's like more than 100 points per list. So it's visible, and you can actually feel it when you build the list that there's another assault squad, which by the way has free equipment options, or there's Plague Marines that have free equipment options. So it was like a combination of all the changes and balance changes that GW applied, which made them, I think, closely viable. But I'm really looking forward whether Blood Angels will be so hot as people expect them to. I think they have few problems that we encountered in our test games.
Okay. And there are one other thing I wanted to ask. If you could give a short breakdown of how the WTC is going to be played this year, because I think it's changed a bit and there's now a sort of a group stage before just going into the normal Swiss pairings.
So yeah, now we have 7 games over 3 days, with 3 games being played in group stage. It's called pods this year, and basically what it means is that all the teams that are attending were ranked historically how well they fared in previous years. So first team, as there were 28 teams and you needed 4 main groups, which is quite convenient. This meant that we had basically 7, we had to divide those teams by 7. So first team plays in a pod with 8th team, 15th team, and 22nd team. And second team plays in a pod with 9th team, 16th, 23rd, etc., etc. So it's a split which was meant to prevent top teams playing already round 2, which was quite common in previous years, and make sure that those 2 days will be more interesting to actually pay attention to, with finals not really happening earlier. And I kind of like that idea, but from my player's standpoint, it will be really tiring because playing 3 games in a day is very mentally taxing. And it's very mentally taxing when you attend a single tournament in Poland. But it gets even worse when you actually have to talk in your non-native language. And there might be some more issues, there more stress, more responsibility than what you actually how do you say it? Encounter when you go to our tournaments. So that's a con that I don't really like. But having said that, I overall think that doing more rounds and preventing top dogs playing against each other is a way to go, because it's nicer to follow after all.
Yeah, sure. You can create more publicity around it. So is there some sort of like officially final at the end, or it's just, you know, because what happens after the group stage? That's the bit that's escaping me.
Basically, you can imagine a group stage as like a first round of a Swiss tournament.
Mm-hmm.
The whole group stage would basically rank you in a Swiss format. So then every team in every group would translate their scores from their group into a Swiss score.
Mm.
So what it would mean is that teams that would win all 3 games in their pod would be paired with all other teams that already won 3 games in their pod. And there's only 4 games remaining. So it essentially means with 7 groups that you will have, maybe not all of the teams will have 3 wins. Let's say only four teams will have 3 wins, and then you would have like 6 teams with 2 wins. And that would mean you kind of get like a championship bracket in a win draw lose system, that you mainly win or lose, there's not many draws. So it kind of simulates the win draw lose bracket, but just without the bracket itself. It's still random within all those teams, but it will reflect the actual skill and how good a certain team was. And there's also another thing that I quite like, because you cannot only prepare more for your own team, so take off a lot of load from players before the first game with pods. You can also, if you have coaches, 2 coaches like we do, you can send those coaches to actually spy onto other games which are already preset. And there are a few games that I want watched and actually know what the teams will be doing in those games. And I do not mean like player on a player level, but also on a team level. So there's more information that you can gather and actually take advantage of.
Okay. Right. So that's it from me for now.
All right. So as I said, I wanted to go into the numbers a little bit. Although again, I don't think I'm going to read out the entire list, but there are a couple of surprises that I see. I'll just go from the top to bottom, and then I'll try to make it as short as possible. So correct me, Typhus, correct me if I'm reading this wrongly, but I understand that there are 26 sisters at the tournament, 25 Tyranid players, 24 Necrons, 15 Blood Angels, 15 Tau, 14,000 Suns. It should say 14 Chaos Knights because there are 1 at the bottom as well. 13 Harlequins, 12 Craft Worlds, 12 Imperial Knights, 11 Drukhari, 9 Death Guards, 6 Admecs, 6 Custodes, 6 Grey Knights, and then anything else below that is 3 or lower. There is a mixture of like 3 Genestealer called Eldari, Astro Militari, and Dark Angels, Demons and Knights, and so on and so on. 1 Inari, 1 Salamanders, 1 Sisters, 1 Orcs. In that, when I look at this list, I haven't been doing any hobbying for 3 to 4 weeks now, as I said, because of being preoccupied with other stuff, with work. When I see Sisters at the top with 26, what happened over the last month to bring Sisters to the top? Because last I heard, they were fairly good mixed with some Helverines, for example. But I understand here you don't mix. Here you have clean factions because you don't want to steal the codex from anyone else, from another player on your team. So what happened to Sisters that they are so numerous and so strong now?
I think it's the same thing that I mentioned when we were thinking about Blood Angels and Death Guard. Their secondaries got improved and they got point drops. That's kind of all. They got like additional 100 points on their list and their secondaries are dump. It's like the same logic with Necrons. You just look at your score sheet and write down points for doing nothing, and it's not really interactive, which I despise wholeheartedly. But it is what it is. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's kind of overhyped that there's so many sisters. They are decent, don't get me wrong. I just think they have few flaws and few pairings that they are not really good into. But the fact that they are so uninteractive makes them very useful in the matchups on like team level pairings. Because you can actually use that to cock block some armies. So I'm looking forward to seeing how certain teams will actually use them. Because, for example, the main meta hopper flavor of the month player of the world, Manichima, is also playing Sisters, which I don't think it's an army for him. It doesn't
Because you
spam
cannot
one
spam
unit.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to spam like 4 units. Sorry, money. But jokes aside, I think this army has legs. I just don't think it's the top of the top. It will have some niches. It has some really good pairings. For example, I think they're really good into Blood Angels, which are quite popular. But I do think it's because this army is just solid. And
it's solid, and in the hands of a capable player, probably it will be even more solid.
They have very high skill cap, but it's also a problem because if you're not really good with the army, you'll not make good use of it.
Yeah, but you've mentioned what Manny. I see Brandon Grant playing them. I see Manuel Belgatore playing them for Germany. Those aren't coincidental players. They probably know what they are doing.
Yeah. I mean, I always like to throw shade, but in all fairness, these army make sense. We already thought about them pre their buffs, and they just got better. So what I'm kind of surprised about is the distribution of Eldar factions. I don't know what I expected. I just didn't expect basically 1/3 of Eldar mixes, 1/3 of Halis, 1/3 of pure Eldar. That was surprising to me, and I don't know what to make of it. What I think this tells is that probably making this army one for the whole team choice. I mean, the codex being only one possible for the team, so you can basically bring Craftworld and Halis at once, was maybe a bad choice. I think both armies could be played separately. I kind of think this is a shame that we did not get that.
Yeah, it's taking a little bit away from the game, I think. But oh well, what can you do? So tell me, because obviously, you as the members of the national teams and all the members of the national teams have seen the lists already. Us little Joe Everymans will probably get to see them later when a compiled PDF file is released. I don't know if it's out yet, but I haven't heard about it.
No, it will be after list correction, so this Sunday. I think this Sunday is the deadline.
Exactly. So like probably, I don't know, subscribers of BCP may have seen them, but yeah, again, you've seen them, so you can give us insight. And I want to find out of all those armies that I read out, are these composed as kind of skew lists? And to anyone who doesn't know, skew list is a list that basically leans towards a specific kind of build to counter something, like all the meltas or all las cannons to counter vehicles, or I don't know, heavy infantry army or something like that. So are the lists that you've seen skew lists, or are those all rounders, or how does it, or what does it look like this year?
I think it's mainly all rounders. I think the game was flattened so much that you can actually make an argument for mostly all rounders. There are a few skew lists, but would you consider a skew list Renegade Knights that mainly have the, I don't know what's the name for their chain cannon on the knight, the 12 shots weapon, but that might be considered a skew list if they only have brigand knights. I think that's the name, what they call. But I wouldn't say there are that many skew lists. There are some decisions, like you can bring more smash units in Blood Angels to actually kill your opponent quicker, or you can bring more trade cheap units like 5-man assault squads to actually play your secondaries better. So there are some choices, but I don't see any massive skew lists this year, to be fair.
Okay. And are there any lists that immediately come to your mind as those that caught your attention or caught you off guard? Like,
I mean, there's
something that you
obviously
didn't
guard
expect?
with Hellhammer.
Yeah.
Like, oh boy, I hope they looked at the deployment zones, because that boy is not moving anywhere.
Oh, I know something about that.
But other than that, there were a few things that I was quite surprised about, like so many Plague Marine lists. There's most of those Death Guard lists have like 40, 50 Plague Marines on foot or in Rhinos, which I was quite surprised by. And I don't think there's much more surprises. Like some people might consider the US list with the 6 Dreadnoughts or Ziegler's AdMech list to be a surprise. Well, I don't really see them that way. I mean, I expected those kinds of armies to be included. So what I would consider mostly a surprise is how many guard was taken. Guard armies were taken. Because I still don't think they have legs play. But maybe I will be wrong. And that Hellhammer will beat some guys up.
Maybe it will. Fingers crossed for it to do well. 0 demons from what I can see from the list, which is sad.
But there is one list that bases on summoning.
Yeah, I know that, but you know,
it's
not.
In our
it's
team.
only implied demons. It's not listed demons. But I think that's like the only faction to be totally left out.
I think CSMs are also left out, but this is due to the cutoff date or something like that, right?
Yeah. Like you could use the old codex. I think there were some arguments to play something like Vladiplate, which was the mix between Renegade Knights and CSM, which is a very high skill, not really obvious army, so I'm not surprised that no one took it.
Right, so are there any particular lists that surprised you or you think are interesting?
I mean, I would consider Germany's Drukhari very interesting because Fred went. He needed. He surely took some heavy drags while doing that list. I'll give him that.
Combat drags.
Oh boy, those. I don't think those were combat drags, man. It was something maybe heavier, whiter. I don't know. Anyway, the list has 2 bombers, 6 Chronos from Dark Technomancers, some Ravagers, so basically shooty Drukhari, which was surprising to see. Although it has some place in the pairings and meta, I will give him that. It was just a surprise. I would say our Drukhari is also quite interesting for players who didn't read it. We have Corsairs. So we are one of those guys who will try to scream Yar while charging. And we also have few lists that aren't as obvious in terms of army choices. Like we have full warrior spam in Needs, which has no tyrants. And also we have Renegade Knights with no big knights and points left out for summoning, which no other team actually took similar list. So there are some choices that might not be obvious, but as I said, the game is way flatter than it was previously. So I don't think there will be those kinds of lists that you could see from the Eastern countries that you would just scratch your head and think, what the hell is going on in there? It's pretty straightforward and obvious. There are just some off meta picks because probably those lesser teams, not those that are fighting for the podium, just took because one of their players had it. And when you look at the top teams, the distribution of the armies is pretty damn similar. You might see few changes, but for example, us and England, we only differ in the choice that they have Blood Angels, we have Drukhari. And for example, US has Custodes and AdMech, while we have, I think it's Imperial Knights and Drukhari. So you could say that 5, 6 out of 8 lists are pretty similar. At least the factions are similar, and I kind of count all the Eldar armies similar because they function quite similarly in the pairings. They have some better pairings, some worse, but I wouldn't consider Hallis and Halli with Eldar mix that different in terms of setup.
Okay, and what about I need to ask because I play this army currently. So what about Tyranids? I mean, have they been hit hard by the nerfs, or you don't really feel any difference?
I think they were hit fairly. They are still one of the top armies. They will now sometimes lose, thanks God. And I think they have some counters. They have some armies they struggle with. What I don't like is in most teams, when you look not only at needs, but I think it's more visible in needs list, is that people tend to spend 5 or 6 command points before the game, starting at 1 or 0, which with how CP100 needs are, if you start with 0 CP, you might be shooting yourself in the foot. So there are some choices that I'm not sure about. I don't really like those armies starting at 0 CP because it gives you no way of actually playing around reserves and actually doing some tricks. Or you might not have CP for something that needs to be done first turn. But needs, I would say they are mostly focused on 2 versions of the army. One is Kraken, which basically consists of 3 big squads of Raveners and Swarmlord to give them obsec. Some teams didn't take a Swarmlord with this list, which I think is a mistake. And other kind of army is basically 18 to 27 Leviathan warriors with 2 Flyrants. Or maybe Flyrant and a Walkrant. But that's kind of it.
Yeah, so no surprises there, to be perfectly honest. With what you said about
I think one
yeah.
team brought like Mortal Bomb list with 3 times Anthrops, 3 times Neurotrop. I think there's one like that.
Interesting. So almost a skill list. But with what you said about the CP utilization and so on, I think it boils down to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it boils down to either you bring an army that is so well prepped that it doesn't rely on CPs at all, or you have that one that really, I mean, in terms of relics, world traits, and so on, the army is sort of servicing itself. You don't need anything extra. Or you have an army that heavily relies on CPs like Leviathan warriors, probably, that will need servicing, damage reduction, and so on. So yeah, I guess that would be the reason for it. Was Vladi dropping from the squad a big setback for the team?
Yeah, so first of all, let's make it clear that basically Vladi he had a work appointment that couldn't be postponed, and he realized that it was a big case for him that he kind of had to work for what he said like a week or 10 days. So he said that he cannot make it both for WTC on a decent level and also work, do his due diligence, which I find fair. And he also gave us quite a long notice. It was what, mid-June. So we had time to find a replacement. Thank you, Leshu, for actually agreeing on a very short notice. So I think obviously it's a drawback because nothing against Leshu. Vladi is just a really good player. Leshu is also a great player. Like his scores show that. We won a tournament last weekend, right?
Exactly.
So, well, I think there's a thing about that when you need a change of a player like that, and you already had an army for him in mind, you need to change your whole conception of the team. Because I needed someone to take over the needs.
That's why I asked about Vladi when we were talking about Nids, because I knew he was the designated player.
Yeah. So there's the issue that you need to find someone, and Pumba was the poor guy with the most time and shortest straw, I guess. But I also needed to factor in who of the players could play this army, because you need to actually account for whether a player likes given playstyle, can handle it, can think about it, and it fits him. So it was a problem that I had to think about, because for some time I even thought about dropping needs for Blood Angels, just because Pumba looked at least more comfortable with Blood Angels. But I don't think it's like a huge setback. There's a setback, but I don't think it's something that would mean that we're out of the competition or anything.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's also worth noting that from the point Vladi told us he drops, he was helping us throughout all the time. He was playing a lot of games. He was chipping his own point of view. So it's not like he dropped from the team. He just won't be at the event itself.
Okay. Now, looking at the let's say the composition of armies that people are bringing to the event, as Joker said, pretty much before the event, we knew that the Space Marines are not in a very good spot. We see a good representation of Blood Angels, but they have their supplement. No other chapter has that sort of representation.
I think Dark Angels have like 3.
Okay, but and then there is like 1 Death Watch, 1 Salamanders, and that's pretty much it. How do you read that? Does that mean that they desperately need a new codex, or people have just not found anything worth attention in them?
Oh boy, time for a controversial opinion. I think we desperately need a new edition with completely revamped scoring system.
So not just the Space Marine Codex, just a new edition.
Yeah, I think the game become too stale. I think too many games look the same. There's a lot of repetitivity. So I think it's all about the game and the scoring system being so repetible. So yeah.
Okay. And I don't know. Do you know if there is any sort of relationship between Games Workshop and the WTC? Does Games Workshop even look at this event? Do they, make notes? Do they learn? Do they observe team tournaments? Or not really?
I think they do. Like, it would be dumb not to, in all fairness. Like, the top players are coming there. You can notice any skews in the armies, what's actually happening. I know they work directly with Tom, who is like one of the main organizers. So they surely must be in some way paying attention to it. I just don't know to what extent, and I don't think I'm qualified to actually talk about it. I know some things, I just don't know whether I even can talk about it, so I will not disclose anything. But I think they should be looking at it, because even though the amount of players coming there might not be as big as any LVO or basically those events that Zach organizes in UK, you get actually all of the celebrities of a specific communities in given countries attending those events. So I think even though there's no GW backing for all of it, the event will be very popular in media space. So it would be dumb to not even pay attention to it and try to get into any basically, how do you call it, collaboration for the future years.
Yeah. Okay. So, Typhus, unless there is anything you specifically want to talk about or add, I just have one last question. It might be a big question, but still just one question left. And that will be, could you summarize the effort that the Polish national team has been putting into in the last months? Like,
oh man,
maybe, I mean, like it may be into numbers or any actual measurement that you want to use. How many games a
I
week
can
do you
give you
guys play?
some numbers that
Yeah.
I was actually running through what I put into since my journey to States.
Yeah, so if it's not a secret, then by
no
all
no
means
no no
shoot.
no. I just have some numbers because as I obviously was in like 9-hour difference, so I just couldn't work. In the evenings, people were waking up, so I could talk with them. But uh, I counted that in the morning I would wake up earlier to actually catch up with anything, write summaries, give my thoughts, and give some directions to players when they were asking what should I do. And if the evening I would spend another hour on that. So in those 3 weeks, I would spend 2 hours daily, and that's given that I couldn't spend more because I was limited. And there were players like Pumba, who since the balanced data slate and Nephilim released, played 18 games in those 3 weeks and watched some other games. And some other players even organized team meetups to actually see what's happening. So there's been a lot of happening.
Yeah, that's dedication.
So I think you could actually feel people being a little bit burned out because we are preparing for this event for 2 years. And there's only so much you can do, especially when you know after the team event in June that you know that in 2 weeks the whole meta will be scratched and you need to start from the ground up. I could sense some people not actually paying attention for those 2 weeks, which I think is fair. Like, why waste your time and maybe even your availability later? But there was a lot of happening. Like, as I said, I think anytime I would end up with a certain amount of pairings done. Some days I would spend more than 1 hour. We were driving around the US and I would do pairings in the car on a passenger seat, in a passenger seat. Whenever I would write down, I need a confirmation of that pairing because if that estimation is actually true, it changes my whole team composition because I will have an argument for something at some point in the pairings. I would get that matchup probably in the next 9 hours. The next time I would log in, I would get a score and summary of what was happening in that game. People would swap into other armies they wouldn't normally play to just give me intel. So there was a lot of happening, and it wasn't only dedication from the team itself. We had few non-team members who would play and actually engage and, for example, give us intel from other teams. So I wouldn't be surprised if you could average it for like 2-3 hours. Every player on average would spend 2-3 hours daily on actually keeping up with all that's happening. And that's on top of work, all the family responsibilities, etc. So it's a lot of work. Some players had more time, like obviously those who just started work live by themselves, etc. But it's a really mammoth task overall. Like you need to spend so much time that I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't see any of the national team member players attend any tournament till Polish Team Championship, just to get some time off and do not look at your own army anymore. And even if they attend Polish Team Championship, they might just pick something completely wacky and new just to get rid of what they had to work with for past month or two.
Yeah, I experienced part of that when I was trying to get people to come to the podcast. Like I spoke to Pumba and some other guys, and they were all like, "Nah, dude, I don't have time. Nah, sorry. Even if I had time, I wouldn't come because I'm almost burnt out." So, I mean, to all our listeners, to the Polish listeners, if there are any, guys, it looks like almost a second job. Because all those guys have families and jobs, and now they treat this as a second job. So whatever
And
happens, kudos to those guys for finding all the
and it
time.
actually is kind of like that. I
Yeah,
realized that I needed to come to the office more often because in the office I could detach from Discord and Facebook and all the things that would actually happen. So I couldn't work from home because I would end up doing pairings instead of doing the coding I should do. So there's that.
so would you
It
say?
preoccupies your mind a lot.
Yeah, definitely. All that stuff that more casual players live through day by day, like list building and so on. You guys take it up to to 11. But would you say? And I think I'll use this question/statement to sort of close off the interview today. From the time perspective, looking into all the preparations that you've put in, I think no other community around the world, focuses on the national team's efforts as much as we do. But would you say that the Polish competitive community is closer together than ever before?
Yeah, I really think so. I think the last 2 years, what we tried with all the COVID pandemic stuff happening, the whole TTS, Discord, I think we actually made the whole community way closer. I don't think you actually have groups between cities that much anymore. You
Not anymore,
actually
yeah.
yeah, I think it was a great change, and I think whatever happens with the event itself, I think that's something that I'm the most proud of for the work that we've put in, because I remember that for a long time people from Poznan would be scared of the national team because they thought that those guys are, I don't know, cheating assholes and there's no fun playing against them. And then turns out in our national team we now have 3 players from their city, and those players were known 2 years back, and they just grinded through all those 8v8 games, met up with us. We played plenty of team meetings and realized that we are just a bunch of normal guys, and I don't think there's much more separation between the communities. I hope you guys feel the same.
Yeah, we do. Although we don't really, aspire to the national team. At least we have a podcast, so that's something. So we're happy about that. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, the observation came to me in the first place that I feel we've never been so close as a community. Like when you go to an event and I start to go. I mean, the atmosphere is such that I started going to events more frequently, like out of Tree City, which already is an achievement for myself because that wasn't a thing a year ago or 2 years ago. Joker, I think you can say the same. You've been more active on the tournament scene than ever before, right?
Yeah, this year I've managed to.
So we
Surprisingly.
chipped in a little bit, into the discussions on Discord and into games on tournaments. So yeah, let's hope this continues. And I think, in a way, we owe that to the national team. So kudos, guys.
I think there's also one thing that we've been trying to do is actually we try to share as much knowledge as we can. If someone wants to learn, we do not have any paywall with coaching stuff, etc., because it won't work in our
Shots
community.
fired.
No, it also won't work in our community. We have too small of a community. We do not have the publicity to actually pull that thing off. Maybe we win WTC and smash every fucking celebrity in the 40k community. Maybe then some eyes will turn to us. But in all fairness, I think the fact that we tried, and whenever any player asks any top player any question, we are really glad to help, and we are really happy. I think you felt that, Joker. Like you played in those 8v8 games, you actually got a good grasp, and whenever you actually had a question or you wanted the feedback, we would give all of that and even spend our time to explain everything.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that's the greatest part, because I don't think the national team is so detached from the community. I think we are really intertwined with the community at this point, which I'm really happy for, because finally, after the years, being a power gamer is normalized and you will not be scolded for that.
I have one more question that popped into my head right now. I mean, WTC is very close, and it's also understandable that the closer we are to the event, the more WTC rulings we see. I think now, there aren't going to be any extra surprises, but I don't know, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, the information was released that WTC has a specific stance on, I don't know, Necrons and bringing back menhirs for the Silent King or something like that. So any of those rulings that WTC has made about army rules, has anything surprised you, or were you actually part of the discussions and it was expected?
I mean, at this point, I couldn't even care about it. Like, I would just take it as it is. Like, if that's a choice, I will just work with it. I don't have time to argue or put my opinion about it. And by the way, about menhirs, I actually think it's a good ruling for one reason. It would be the first case in the game where you could actually have 2 wounded models in a unit.
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't really like.
Yeah, I was surprised that the ITC actually ruled otherwise, and they ruled that you can revive them. And the
And
WTC said no.
there's like a closed loop, because the rulebook says you need to take wounds on the wounded model, which is Silent King, and then you need to take wounds on the menhir, and obviously the codex rule supersedes, but blah 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 blah.
Yeah, we know how it works.
But it doesn't do it like blatantly, directly. Oh, is the word I was looking for. So I guess you could argue which takes precedence, and that's not something you want to have going on.
Yeah, and also the Silent King doesn't have reanimation protocol. So you could make an argument that the rules as intended, he shouldn't be reanimated. Anyway, like, those are decisions. Do I agree with all of them? No, but it is what it is. We need to deal with it. And I cannot spend my time discussing all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Joker, do you have any other questions, or do you think we can wrap this up?
No, I think we can wrap it up.
Okay, awesome. So, guys, if you have any more specific questions to me, to Joker, to Typhus, leave the questions in the comments. I think we all would be happy to answer them, unless you ask about specific tactics that the team members are going to use. I don't think you're going to get anything from
But
Typhus on that.
we can disclose that after the event.
Yeah, we can definitely disclose that after the event. If you want to know anything more specific about any of the team members, I guess this could be arranged if they have time prior to the event. That might be difficult, so we don't promise anything. And yeah, if you liked what you heard, if you like the podcast, if you like what we do, please leave a like, leave a subscribe, leave a positive review on Facebook or any other podcast medium that you use, because that helps us grow and helps us reach further audiences. Even despite the entire spam that I do around the podcast, it will still help us to grow a little bit more, and we will greatly appreciate it. So yeah, thanks in advance for your help. With that, I think we will conclude. So thank you, Joker, and thank you, Typhus, for participation.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, and until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.